What if I told you that one of the greatest land powers in history, Rome, only became the ruler of the world after conquering the element it despised and feared most? The Romans were soldiers and farmers, firmly rooted to the land, and considered the sea to be a foreign and treacherous place. However, it was they who created a naval machine that changed the course of history and turned the Mediterranean Sea into their inner lake. Watch the video to the end to find out how a nation that could not swim built the largest fleet in the ancient world. What ingenious invention allowed them to win battles on water as well as on land, and why their fleet became not only a weapon, but also the main tool for maintaining power in a giant empire. What if I told you that everything you believed about Roman power was incomplete? We are used to imagining the Romans as legionnaires marching along roads, but their true dominance would have been impossible without their fleet. Yet in the early Roman Republic, the sea was viewed with deep suspicion. The sea was an unpredictable element, belonging to merchants, pirates, and Greeks, not valiant warriors. A true Roman cultivated the land and fought in the ranks. Although maritime trade brought wealth, it was considered a less honorable occupation than agriculture or military service. The Romans viewed Carthage, a city-state built on maritime trade, with suspicion, seeing it as something alien to their way of life. Their gods were associated with the land, harvest, and war, not with the endless expanse of water. This cultural prejudice was so strong that for centuries Rome had almost no fleet of its own. Instead of building their own ships, the Romans relied on their allies. Italian Greek cities such as Tarentum and Naples had ancient maritime traditions and provided Rome with ships and crews as needed. It was a convenient system that allowed Rome to wage war at sea without getting its hands dirty in an unworthy craft. Rome paid for loyalty and protection on land, while the Greeks provided cover from the water. This strategy worked until Rome's ambitions extended beyond the Apennine Peninsula. While Rome was at war with its neighbors in Italy, the Navy was more of a supporting force. It was used to transport troops over short distances or to blockade coastal cities. No one in Rome could have imagined that in just a few generations, they would have to build hundreds of warships. Early Roman ships, if they can be called that, were mostly copies of Greek designs. The triremes and penteres they received from their allies were time-tested designs. The Romans saw no need for innovation, as they did not see their future at sea. They were focused on improving the legion, building roads, and strengthening their power on land. The lack of its own fleet and maritime experience made Rome vulnerable. Any power with a strong navy could threaten their coastline and trade. But until a certain point, Rome simply did not have an enemy that could pose such a challenge. Everything changed when the shadow of the greatest maritime power of the time, Carthage, appeared on the horizon. The conflict with Carthage was a wake-up call for Rome. Suddenly, it turned out that the legions could not reach the enemy because the way was blocked by the sea, which was completely controlled by the enemy. The war for Sicily, known as the First Punic War, was impossible without a fleet. Rome was faced with a choice: give up its ambitions or become a maritime power. It was a painful decision that broke with centuries of tradition. The Senate had to convince the citizens of the need for huge expenditures to build a fleet. It was an undertaking whose success no one was sure of. The Romans were entering a game whose rules they did not know, against a master who had been playing it for centuries. The legacy of this disregard for the sea persisted for a long time. Even when Rome became the ruler of the seas, service in the Navy was considered less prestigious than service in the legion. Sailors, or classiarii, were often not Roman citizens, but residents of the provinces or even former slaves. They were granted citizenship only after many years of impeccable service. Thus, the history of the Roman Navy is not a story of love for the sea, but a story of harsh necessity. It is a story of how a nation of land warriors was forced to break itself in order to win. They did not simply build a navy, they invented their own way of waging war at sea. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about how necessity can force an entire nation to change its character? Write about it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about Rome's first great naval adversary? Carthage was the complete opposite of Rome. Founded by the Phoenicians, a people of sailors and traders, Carthage built its empire on the water. Their fleet was unmatched in the Western Mediterranean, and their trade routes stretched from the shores of Africa to Britain. The Carthaginians were natural sailors. From childhood, they learned to steer ships, read the stars, and understand the winds. Their ships, especially the mighty quinqueremes, or penteres, were the pinnacle of naval engineering at the time. They were fast, maneuverable, and armed with powerful rams. Carthage's naval tactics had been honed over centuries. They relied on speed and maneuverability rather than brute force. Their admirals were masters of complex formations, such as diec plus, or breaking through enemy lines followed by a ramming attack on the side. For the Romans, accustomed to head-on collisions between legions, this was a completely incomprehensible art. When Rome became involved in the war for Sicily, it immediately felt the power of the Carthaginian fleet. The Roman legions could win on land, but Carthage easily supplied its Sicilian cities by sea. Any attempt by Rome to transport troops to the island or besiege a coastal fortress was immediately suppressed by Carthaginian squadrons. Rome realized that without its own fleet, it could not win the war. But how could it build a fleet without ships, experienced shipbuilders, or sailors? The first attempts were disastrous. Small squadrons, hastily built or provided by allies, were easily destroyed by experienced Carthaginian captains. The Romans were good soldiers, but terrible sailors. It was at this moment of despair, according to legend, that a turning point occurred. It is said that the Romans captured a Carthaginian quinquereme that had run aground. They immediately dragged it ashore and used it as a model. The Senate ordered the construction of a fleet of 100 quinqueremes and 20 triremes, and to do so in record time. It was an unprecedented project. Rome did not have shipyards capable of fulfilling such an order. They had to be built from scratch all along the Italian coast. Thousands of trees were cut down to build hulls, masts, and oars. All the resources of the Republic were thrown into this titanic project. While the ships were being built, the Romans faced another problem: where to find rowers. Operating a quinquereme required hundreds of trained rowers, working in perfect synchrony. Rome did not have them, so they resorted to another unorthodox solution. Wooden simulators were built on land to mimic the rowing benches on ships. Thousands of recruits, many of whom had never seen the sea, sat down on these benches. Under the command of an instructor, they learned to row on land, practicing rhythm and coordination of movements. It was a strange sight, but it worked. In just a few months, Rome, which had no fleet, created an armada from scratch capable of challenging the ruler of the seas. However, the Romans understood that their inexperienced crews would not be able to compete with the Carthaginians in maneuverable combat. They needed something that would negate the enemy's advantage in experience. What do you think a land soldier can do on the deck of a ship? The Romans found the answer, and it was ingenious in its simplicity. They decided to turn a naval battle into a land battle. But how could they do that in the middle of the open sea? Are you ready to learn about the secret weapon that changed the rules of the game? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the early Roman fleet. This secret was a device that shocked the experienced Carthaginian sailors. The Romans, realizing their weakness in maneuvering and ramming, invented the corvus, or crow. It was not just a weapon, it was a revolution in naval tactics, a unique solution that only a nation of land soldiers could have come up with. The crow was a boarding bridge about 11 meters long and just over a meter wide. It was installed on the bow of a Roman ship and could rotate around its axis. On the underside of its tip was a heavy, sharp metal spike, similar to a crow's beak, hence its name. The device worked on the principle of a lifting crane. The bridge was held in a vertical position by a system of ropes and blocks passing through the mast. When a Roman ship approached an enemy ship, the bridge was lowered sharply. The heavy spike would pierce the enemy's deck with force, breaking through the planks and firmly locking the two ships together. The Carthaginians were stunned. Their tactic was to sail past the enemy, breaking their oars, or to ram them and quickly retreat. They were not prepared for their ship to be suddenly hooked. Two ships, locked together by a crow, became an immovable platform. At that moment, Rome's main weapon, the legionaries, came into play. Heavily armed Roman soldiers rushed across the bridge, as if on land, onto the deck of the enemy ship. For them, it was business as usual. The naval battle instantly turned into a land battle, in which the Romans were unmatched. The first major use of the corvus in the Battle of Melas in 260 BC brought Rome a resounding victory. The Carthaginian admiral Hannibal Hiscon was so confident of his superiority that he attacked the Romans without any particular formation. When his leading ships were captured one after another with the help of the new device, panic broke out in the Carthaginian fleet. The Romans captured dozens of ships, including the admiral's flagship. It was not just a victory, it was a humiliation for Carthage. A nation of sailors was defeated on its own territory by a nation of farmers. The corvus completely changed the balance of power at sea. The Romans proved that ingenuity can beat experience. However, the corvus also had serious drawbacks. It was very heavy and cumbersome. Located at the bow, it shifted the ship's center of gravity, making it extremely unstable in bad weather. The Romans were not yet experienced sailors and did not fully understand the risks of sailing on the open sea. Because of this instability, the Roman fleet suffered huge losses not from the enemy, but from storms. Entire squadrons were lost during storms, dragging thousands of soldiers and sailors to the bottom. The heavy corvus made the situation worse, preventing the ships from coping with high waves. Gradually, as Roman sailors gained experience, the corvus was abandoned. By the time of the Second Punic War, it was almost never used. The Romans learned to wage war at sea in earnest. They improved the maneuverability of their ships and mastered ramming tactics. But the corvus had fulfilled its historical role. It was the crutch that allowed Rome, which did not know how to sail, to get on its feet in a new environment. It was a brilliant engineering solution that gave them the time they needed to learn. If you like this story about Roman ingenuity, please like this video. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos about the great technologies of ancient Rome. Guess how long it took the Romans to build a fleet of 120 ships from scratch? What I'm about to tell you sounds like fiction, but it's a historical fact. The Romans built their first large fleet in just 60 days, according to some sources. It wasn't just construction, it was the first naval industrial revolution in history. As we have already mentioned, it all started with a captured Carthaginian model. But it is one thing to have a model and quite another to set up mass production. The Roman Senate mobilized all the resources of the Republic. The coastal cities of Italy were turned into giant shipyards. Thousands of craftsmen, carpenters, and workers were brought in to help with the construction. The secret to such incredible speed lay in standardization. The Romans approached shipbuilding in the same way they approached the construction of roads or camps. They broke down the complex process into simple, repetitive operations. Every detail of the ship, frames, planking, oars, was produced to a single standard. Ships were assembled almost like a construction set. Parts were manufactured on shore, assigned numbers, and then delivered to the assembly site. This allowed work to be carried out in parallel on dozens of ships. Instead of one master leading the ship from start to finish, different teams were responsible for their own areas of work. It was a real assembly line of the ancient world. This system not only sped up construction, but also made repairs easier. If a ship was damaged in battle, the broken part could be easily replaced with a new standard one. The Carthaginians, with their traditional artisanal approach, couldn't compete with this speed of production. Raw materials were a huge problem. To build a fleet of just 100 quinqueremes, entire forests had to be cut down. Rome did not hesitate to deplete the forests of Italy. Bronze for rams, iron for nails and crow's beaks, hemp for ropes. All of this was needed in colossal quantities. The Republic was working at the limit of its capabilities. Financing this project was also a huge task. The war required enormous amounts of money. Senators and wealthy citizens contributed their personal funds, understanding that Rome's survival was at stake. It was a nationwide project that united all of Italy. But building the ships was only half the battle. As we remember, they had to be manned. Training the rowers on land was only the first stage. As soon as the ships were launched, the real training began. The crews learned to maneuver, keep formation, and, most importantly, use the crows. These first Roman fleets were imperfect. The ships, hastily built from green wood, were heavy and slow, but there were many of them. Rome could afford to lose ships in storms and battles because it knew it would build new ones. Carthage, with its limited resources, could not afford such a luxury. The Roman system proved its effectiveness. Having lost hundreds of ships in storms, Rome built new fleets again and again. This ability to recover quickly ultimately broke Carthage. They could not keep up with Rome's industrial power. What do you think is more important in war? Experience or the ability to mass produce? In the next chapter, we will see how these new fleets were baptized in battle in the greatest naval battles of antiquity. The First Punic War became a testing ground for the new Roman fleet. One of the greatest and most decisive battles of this war was the Battle of Cape Ecnomus off the coast of Sicily in 256 BC. It was not just a battle, it was one of the largest naval battles in human history. According to some estimates, about 700 ships and up to 300,000 men from both sides took part in it. The Roman fleet, commanded by the consuls Marcus Atilius Regulus and Lucius Manlius Vulso, intended to transport an invasion army to Africa, to the territory of Carthage itself. The Carthaginians, fully aware of the threat, brought out their entire fleet to intercept the Romans. The two giant fleets met on the open sea. The Romans, aware of the Carthaginians' maneuverability, employed a new tactical formation. They arranged their fleet in the shape of a wedge or triangle. The two forward squadrons sailed in a staggered formation, forming a spearhead directed at the enemy. The third squadron towed transport ships carrying the army. The fourth squadron, the reserve, brought up the rear, covering the rear. This was a land army formation transferred to water, designed to break through the enemy's center. The Carthaginians, in turn, deployed their fleet in a long line, intending to flank the Romans. The battle began when the Carthaginian center deliberately retreated, drawing the two leading Roman squadrons with it. At the same time, the Carthaginian flanks attacked the Roman ships towing the transports and the reserve. The Roman wedge split into three separate battles. But here again, the Raven proved itself. The Roman ships, attacked from the flanks, successfully used boarding gear, capturing one enemy ship after another. In the center, the Romans, having defeated the retreating enemy, turned around and came to the aid of their comrades. The battle turned into a series of fierce boarding skirmishes in which the Roman legionaries were stronger. The outcome of the Battle of Ecnomus was a triumph for Rome. The Carthaginian fleet was destroyed, losing dozens of ships sunk and captured. The way to Africa was open. This victory, achieved only a few years after the creation of the fleet, showed that Rome had become a full-fledged maritime power. However, the path to domination was not easy. The Romans were still inexperienced sailors, and the sea punished them severely for this. After landing in Africa, the Roman fleet was almost completely destroyed twice by severe storms. Hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of people died not at the hands of the enemy, but because of the elements. The Carthaginians, who knew the sea better, avoided sailing in stormy weather, something the Romans had not yet learned to do. In addition, not all battles were successful. In the Battle of Drepana in 249 BC, the Roman fleet suffered a crushing defeat. Roman Admiral Publius Claudius Pulcher, ignoring bad omens, attacked the Carthaginian fleet in the harbor. The Carthaginians, blocked in a narrow space, could not maneuver, but the Romans could not use their numerical advantage either. In the confined space, the Roman ships got in each other's way. The Carthaginians, who were more experienced, were able to defeat the Roman armada. This defeat was a heavy blow to Rome. It showed that brute force and crow alone were not enough. Experience, naval training, and competent command were needed. Nevertheless, Rome demonstrated its main quality, perseverance. Despite catastrophic losses from storms and defeat at Drepanum, the Romans built more and more fleets. They learned from their mistakes. They began to understand the sea, studying its laws and currents. The final battle of the First Punic War at the Egadian Islands in 241 BC was different. The Roman fleet, built with private donations from citizens, was lighter and more maneuverable. The Romans, abandoning the heavy Raven, met the enemy in a maneuverable battle and won. Carthage was broken and asked for peace. What if everything you were taught about the Roman Navy is outdated? We are accustomed to associating it with the crow, but that was just a childhood disease that Rome quickly outgrew. By the end of the First Punic War, the Romans realized that their ingenious invention was a double-edged sword. It brought victories, but it also made ships unstable and vulnerable to storms. The real revolution in the Roman Navy came when they learned to sail. Having gained experience in countless campaigns and battles, Roman sailors and admirals came to appreciate the same qualities as their enemies: speed and maneuverability. The corvus was gradually abandoned. The Roman navy entered the second phase of its development. Heavy and clumsy boarding ships were replaced by lighter and faster vessels. The Romans did not hesitate to borrow the best ideas from other peoples. They took note of the ships of the Illyrian pirates who harassed them in the Adriatic. These ships, known as Liburns, were smaller than quinquerem, but incredibly fast and maneuverable. The Romans copied and improved this design. The Liburna became the new standard ship of the Roman fleet. It had 2 rows of oars, was narrow, and had excellent seaworthiness. Instead of relying on boarding, Liburnas were designed for ramming and quick maneuvers. Tactics also changed. Now Roman admirals relied not on the engagement of ships, but on superiority in maneuvering and artillery. The decks of Roman ships were lined with throwing machines. Ballistas, scorpions, and catapults rained down a hail of stones, pots of flammable mixture, and heavy arrows on the enemy. One of the most interesting innovations of that period was the harpax, or hawk. It was invented by Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, a brilliant admiral and friend of Octavian Augustus. The hawk was, in essence, a development of the crow idea, but much more elegant. It was a heavy boarding hook that was fired from a ballista. This hook, connected to the ship by a strong rope, pierced the hull of the enemy vessel. Unlike the crow, it did not create a bridge, but simply pulled the enemy ship alongside the Roman ship. After that, winches pulled the enemy closer, and it became easy prey for the boarding party. This was much safer and more effective than a heavy bridge. The Roman fleet also became more professional. Whereas previously crews were recruited from conscripts and allies, now permanent naval bases were established. The most famous were the bases at Miseno, near Naples and Ravenna on the Adriatic coast. These bases became home to permanent squadrons, the classis missinensis and classis ravenatis. The sailors who served at these bases were professionals. They honed their skills for years, participating in exercises and patrols. Service in the Navy, although still less prestigious than in the legions, became an honorable career that opened the way to Roman citizenship for provincials. This new professional and technologically advanced fleet became an instrument that allowed Rome not only to defeat Carthage, but also to conquer the entire Mediterranean. It fought against the fleets of the Hellenistic kingdoms in the east, against the Pontic kingdom of Mithridates, and ultimately in the Roman civil wars. Which of these 2 eras of the Roman fleet do you think was more important? The era of the corvus or the era of the Liburnian ship? In the next chapter, we will see how this fleet dealt with a threat that seemed invincible: pirates. By the 1st century BC, the Mediterranean Sea faced a new threat that was more insidious than any enemy fleet. Piracy, which had always existed, had grown to incredible proportions. The Cilician pirates, based on the coast of modern-day Turkey, had created a veritable shadow state with their own bases, fleet, and laws. These pirates were not just bandits. They acted boldly and in an organized manner. They captured ships, plundered coastal cities, and took noble Romans hostage. Their activity was so great that they began to threaten the very existence of Rome. They disrupted the bread route, the supply of grain from Egypt and Sicily on which Rome depended. The Roman Senate was in a panic. Bread prices in the capital skyrocketed, and hunger riots began. It became clear that scattered punitive expeditions were not working. A systematic approach was needed. In 67 BC, the Lex Gabinia, or Gabinius Law, was passed. It gave one man, Gnaeus Pompeius, Pompey the Great, unprecedented powers for 3 years. Pompey was given absolute power over the entire Mediterranean Sea and 50 miles inland. He was given a huge fleet, an army, and unlimited finances at his disposal. It was the largest anti-piracy operation in history. Pompey approached the task with Roman methodicalness. He understood that chasing individual pirate ships was pointless. He decided to divide the entire Mediterranean Sea into 13 sectors. Each sector was assigned its own commander with his own squadron. The plan was simple: to begin a simultaneous and systematic sweep from west to east. Pompey's squadrons combed through each sector, driving the pirates out of their secluded bays and bases. They blocked the straits and river mouths, preventing the robbers from escaping. The pirates, accustomed to always being able to hide in another region, suddenly found that there was nowhere to run. Roman ships were closing in on them from all sides. This scorched earth tactic worked flawlessly. Pompey drove the pirates eastward to their main stronghold, Cilicia. While his fleet cleared the sea, his legions on land prepared to storm the pirate fortresses. The pirates' wealth, arsenals, and shipyards, accumulated over decades, were now under threat. The campaign culminated not in battle, but in surrender. Locked in their strongholds and unable to take to the sea, the pirates realized that their game was over. They surrendered to Pompey. Pompey, in turn, showed not only firmness, but also mercy. He understood that many had become pirates not because of a good life, but because of war and poverty. Instead of executing thousands of prisoners, he decided to resettle them. The former pirates were settled deep inland in deserted cities and lands. They were given the opportunity to become farmers and craftsmen, integrating them into Roman society. The entire operation, which was supposed to take 3 years, was completed by Pompey in just 3 months. The Mediterranean Sea was completely cleared of pirates. Trade routes were restored, and grain flowed into Rome again. This campaign was a brilliant demonstration of the power of the Roman fleet. It showed that the fleet was not only an instrument of war, but also an instrument of order and stability. The Roman fleet became a maritime police force, guaranteeing security across vast expanses. This new role would become its primary function for the next several centuries. But before a long period of peace began, the fleet was destined to play a decisive role in the last and bloodiest civil war that determined the fate of Rome. The civil wars that engulfed the Roman Republic in the 1st century BC did not spare the navy. Great commanders such as Caesar, Pompey, Brutus, and Octavian actively used naval forces to transport troops, blockade opponents, and fight decisive battles. But one battle stands apart. The Battle of Actium in 31 BC was not just a naval battle, it was the moment when the fleet determined who would rule Rome. The conflict erupted between the last two contenders for power, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, and Mark Antony, his former ally, who had joined forces with the Egyptian Queen Cleopatra. Power over the entire Roman world was to be decided in one decisive battle. Antony and Cleopatra assembled their fleet in the Gulf of Ambracia, off Cape Actium on the west coast of Greece. Their fleet was impressive. It consisted mainly of huge, heavy ships, kincurams and even decares, ships with 10 rows of oarsmen. These were veritable floating fortresses with high sides and towers equipped with catapults and thousands of soldiers. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant admiral Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, was completely different. It consisted mainly of light and maneuverable liburns. Agrippa, a veteran of naval warfare, understood that these ships would have an advantage in maneuverable combat. He also armed them with his invention, the Hawk. Agrippa blocked Antony's fleet in the bay. The standoff lasted several months. Antony's camp began to experience problems with supplies and disease. In the end, Antony and Cleopatra decided to break through the blockade and flee to Egypt. On September 2nd and 31 BC, their fleet sailed into the open sea. The battle began. Antony's heavy ships formed a tight crescent, like an impenetrable wall. Agrippa's light liburns circled around them, not daring to come close. They resembled a pack of wolves surrounding bears. Agrippa ordered his ships not to engage in close combat, but to use their maneuverability and artillery. The liburns fired ballistae at Antony's giants, trying to damage their oars and rudders, depriving them of their ability to maneuver. They used hawks to pull individual ships out of formation and deal with them one by one. Antony's heavy ships could not keep up with their fast opponents and could not use their rams effectively. In the heat of battle, Cleopatra, whose squadron was in reserve, suddenly gave the signal to retreat. Her 60 ships raised their sails and headed south. Seeing this, Antony abandoned his fleet and rushed after her in a fast ship. His soldiers and sailors, left without a commander, were confused. Antony's fleet, deprived of its leader, fought for several more hours, but the battle was already lost. Many ships surrendered to Octavian, others were captured or disabled. It was a complete and unconditional victory for Octavian. Antony's land army, seeing the destruction of their fleet, defected to the victor the next day. The Battle of Actium had enormous consequences. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, where they soon committed suicide. Octavian remained the sole ruler of Rome. He returned to the capital as a triumphant victor, took the name Augustus, and became the first Roman emperor. The Republic died and the Roman Empire was born. This battle was a turning point in history, and it was won at sea. The fleet, once despised by the Romans, became the instrument that forged the empire. Agrippa's victory at Actium became a classic example of naval tactics, proving the superiority of maneuverability and technology over brute force and size. After this battle, Rome had no enemies left at sea. The civil wars were over. An era began that went down in history as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. And in maintaining this peace, the fleet was given a completely new, but no less important role. After the victory at Actium and the establishment of Augustus's rule, the Mediterranean Sea became, de facto, a Roman lake. For the first time in history, one people controlled its entire coastline. The Romans proudly began to call it Mare Nostrum, our sea. The era of great naval battles was over. Rome simply had no worthy opponents left on the water. The role of the fleet changed dramatically. From an instrument of conquest, it became an instrument of control and stability. Pax Romana, the Roman peace that lasted more than 2 centuries, would have been impossible without a constant naval presence. The main task of the fleet was no longer war, but protection. Augustus and his successors created a system of permanent, professional naval fleets stationed at strategically important bases. As we have already mentioned, the main ones were the Miseno and Ravenna fleets in Italy. They were a kind of naval special forces of the empire, ready to respond quickly to any threat and capable of operating anywhere at sea. But in addition to them, numerous provincial fleets were created. Classis Britannica patrolled the English Channel and the coast of Britain. Classis Germanica controlled the Rhine River, serving as an important logistical artery for the legions on the German border. The fleet on the Danube, Classis Pannonica and Classis Musica, performed the same role on another troubled border. Classis Syriaca was based in the east, watching over the Parthians. But perhaps the most important of the provincial fleets was Classis Alexandrina, based in Egypt. Its sole and primary task was to protect grain shipments to Rome. The life of the capital literally depended on this fleet. The ships of Mare Nostrum were workhorses. The giant quinqueremes of the Punic Wars and Actium were a thing of the past. Now the fleet was based on fast and reliable Liburns, triremes, and baramies. They were ideal for patrolling, pursuing smugglers, and demonstrating force. The sailors of the Roman fleet, the classiarii, became elite specialists. They not only commanded ships, but also served as marines, engineers, and artillerymen. They built bridges, dug canals, and even participated in gladiatorial combat, staging naval battles, naumachii, in flooded amphitheaters to entertain the crowds. This fleet ensured the smooth operation of the empire's gigantic economic machine. Merchant ships could safely cross the sea from Spain to Syria without fear of pirates. Legions could be quickly transferred from one end of the empire to the other. Roman officials and couriers traveled at unprecedented speeds. The sea was transformed from a barrier into the empire's main highway. The Roman fleet became the glue that held the disparate provinces together. It was the invisible but omnipresent guarantor of Roman order. This system was so effective that it lasted for hundreds of years. The history of the Roman fleet is a story of incredible adaptation. From complete rejection of the sea to the creation of the corvus, from the corvus to the mastery of maneuverable tactics, and finally to the transformation into a global security system. The Romans did not invent seafaring, but they perfected it in terms of organization, logistics, and scale. They took foreign technologies, whether it was the Carthaginian quinquereme or the Illyrian Liburnian, and put them to work for their state apparatus. They transformed the Navy from a simple weapon into a complex institution that ensured peace and prosperity. Let's take a closer look at what the ships that Rome used to conquer the world were like, and what life was like for those who served on them. Roman naval engineering was based on borrowing and improving. They did not invent new types of ships from scratch, but took the best models and adapted them to their needs. For a long time, the main combat unit was the quinquereme, or pentere. Its name, the five-rower, is still a matter of debate among historians. It is unlikely that the oars were arranged in 5 rows, as this would have been technically impossible. Most likely, there were 3 tiers of rowers, with 2 people sitting on each oar on the upper 2 tiers. It was a heavy, powerful ship designed for ramming and boarding, a true battleship of antiquity. It was then replaced by the trireme, the classic ship of the Greek world, with 3 tiers of rowers, 1 person per oar. It was lighter and more maneuverable than the quinquereme, but the real star of the imperial fleet was the Liburnian ship. Taken from pirates, it usually had 2 rows of rowers and was optimized for speed. It was these ships that carried out the main patrol service. Roman ships were built using the planking first technology. First, the hull was built from planks that were joined together using a complex system of tenons and mortises, the tenon and mortise method. Only after that were the frames, or ribs, inserted inside. It was a labor-intensive but very durable construction. The main weapon of any warship was the rostrum, or ram. It was a heavy bronze tip at the bow of the ship, often shaped like an animal's head. It was designed to pierce the underwater part of an enemy ship, causing a leak that it could not cope with. Artillery was installed on the deck. Scorpions, similar to large crossbows, fired heavy arrows. Ballistas, which worked on the principle of a torsion spring, threw stones weighing tens of kilograms. These machines were used to bombard the enemy's deck and hull before boarding or ramming. The life of a sailor, or classiarius, was hard. Unlike legionaries, they were rarely Roman citizens. Most were residents of the coastal Greek, Egyptian, or Syrian provinces. They signed a contract for 26 years of service, at the end of which they received Roman citizenship for themselves and their children. The ship was very cramped. The rowers sat on their benches in the hold, where it was stuffy and dark. Contrary to popular myths, rowers on warships were almost never slaves. They were free, professional soldiers whose coordinated work was the key to victory. Slaves would not have fought with the necessary zeal. In addition to the rowers, there was a detachment of Marines who fought on deck. There was also a captain, triarchus, officers, a navigator, and a crew of sailors to work the sails. Operating such a complex mechanism as a warship required the highest discipline and training. Roman naval bases, such as Misenum or Ravenna, were huge complexes. They included shipyards for construction and repair, arsenals, barracks, and artificial harbors, with covered docks where ships could be stored on land to prevent their hulls from becoming encrusted with barnacles. These were veritable cities dedicated to the fleet. We see how reluctantly Rome entered the maritime world, but once it took that step, it changed it forever. The history of the Roman Navy is a story of how dire necessity breeds ingenious innovation. From the clumsy but effective corvus to the complex logistic system of Mare Nostrum, Rome proved that its greatest talents were organization, scale, and persistence. The Romans did not invent the ship, but they did invent the naval machine. They were the first to apply industrial production methods, standardization, and a professional military structure to the fleet. They turned the unpredictable sea into a system of roads connecting their empire together. Without this fleet, there would have been no victory over Carthage, no conquest of Greece and Egypt, and ultimately, no Roman Empire. The fleet was the quiet but powerful tool that allowed the legions to march on land, knowing that their flanks were covered and their supply lines were secure. What do you think is the most important lesson from the history of the Roman fleet today? Is it the idea that you need to adapt and embrace new technologies, or that organization and logistics are more important than simple technological advantage? Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the great civilizations of the past.